has been reminiscing, and I hadn't planned to do very much of that, but let me just tell you about one thing. During World War II, I was a radio technician trained by the Navy, and about halfway through the course, an opportunity presented itself for me to become an aviation radio technician. And after I was graduated, they started to put aviation radio technicians aboard airplanes, and we were called flight aviation radio technicians, and I was an FART third class. AERS was founded some years ago, apparently. I looked at the Constitution, and the purpose of the organization is spelled out in the first few paragraphs. And I've put in boldface, large type here, what I consider to be the important part of the purpose. Informal discussion and exchange of ideas. And they talk about the areas here, but that informal discussion and exchange of ideas, that's what we're here for. That's what it's all about. And in order to do that, we have to communicate. And what is communication? Well, there are a few definitions here, and I've pulled these from various dictionaries. And again, I feel that the last line there sums it up. There's got to be an exchange, some sort of a give and take. And that's what we're all about. Now, let me give you a couple of examples of communication. First, poor communication. I was in a bar a few weeks ago, and in comes a grasshopper. Jumps up the bar stool, bartender turns around, looks at him, and says, "Hey, we got a drink named after you." And the grasshopper looks him in the eye and says, "Gee, thanks, but why in the world would you want to name a drink Bob?" Poor communication. Another example of poor communication. I was in an antique store looking at an antique clock that I was interested in, and in comes a gent, and the proprietor, usual line, "Hi, how are you today? What can I do for you?" And the prospective customer looked her right in the eye and said, "Hey, what's new?" Antique store, you know. Poor communication. Didn't know what to help. All right, now I'd like to contrast that with a really great communicator. Now this is a little newspaper that's put out by the Smithsonian. It's called Research Reports. Put out about 4 or 5 times a year. And see, someone who works in the Smithsonian building, not for this, he's going to tell you that this is indeed a real thing. This is the autumn 1997 issue, and there's an article in here, and you can look at it after the meeting if you don't believe that this is really true, about Joseph Henry. Joseph Henry was the first secretary of the Smithsonian after it was founded. That's sort of the director. And he was an internationally known scientist. As a matter of fact, those of you who have done any work at all in electricity know that the Henry is the unit of inductance. Internationally known scientist, and he was the director. And was this guy ever a communicator? I have pulled this from this article, word for word. After his death, he was estimated that in addition to attending U.S. Lighthouse Board meetings, he spent 6 weeks to 2 months each year working full-time for the board. Can you imagine what he did before he died? This guy was something. Well, how do we do that? I've listed 3 types of communication here. There's probably more. The spoken word, the lecture. Those of you who are in academia know that perhaps this is the most inefficient method of communication. Why? Well, there's not this exchange. That's the important thing. You've got to have a one-on-one. That's where you get the maximum amount of communication. The written word, papers. Some people read them. Books. Some people read those too. And letters. I was telling some friends that yesterday, I guess, that Matthew Fontaine Maury, all of his personal papers have been accumulated by VMI. He spent a year or 2 at VMI shortly before his death, and they are trying to collate them and put them together. They can't read his handwriting. So sometimes letters aren't the best way to do it. And in modern times, the cybernetic word, voicemail. Well, you don't even get to talk to a person. You notice I haven't listed the telephone there because who talks to people anymore? You pick up the phone and call somebody and you get push 1 for this, push 2 for that. Email. Well, this is what I use mostly for communication because it's simple and you don't have to know how to spell. And there are chat rooms on the internet and the web and so on. But when you get right down to it, this is what we're talking about. One-on-one. All right, how do we maximize communication? Well, we want to create an atmosphere conducive to idea exchange. And I've listed here the things that I think are important. No neckties, well, that goes without saying, of course. The informal paper, work in progress, new ideas. After all, isn't science just the interpretation of data? There are no facts, they're just data. So everybody interprets, and they interpret it differently. And that's what an informal paper is all about. You give your interpretation, somebody else has got another one, put them together, you might come with a completely different interpretation of the result. All right, the informal mixer. The AERS beverage consumption event, I think, is a classic example of this. You go to there, and where's Van? And you talk about science, because that's what you came here for. This is part of your job, attending AERS meetings. And you talk, and perhaps it helps a little bit if you got some of that lubrication of talking in your hand. And then you have an informal banquet. And again, you spend time just standing around talking, and you sit down and you have a little chow and you talk over your meal, and then after the meal you talk a little bit more. We used to play cards, as Gene Cronin indicated, but nobody would play with us anymore, so he never did understand poker. Okay, the spoken word certainly is the way to communicate. And if you look at this list here, this is what happens in an AERS meeting. We have events structured particularly, uniquely, to promote informal exchange of ideas. The paper presentations are just something to draw you here so you can fill out an expense form and get paid to come here. But it's the informal exchange, the hours you spend just talking to somebody, that's where the work gets done, really. And those of you who are too young to realize that's the truth, you're going to find that out. All right, how well has AERS done as far as promoting? Well, I think, I really feel this way, and I have for years, that AERS has a reputation that it's a jewel of an informal regional society. It really is. I find it fun to attend these meetings. Maybe it's because of the people. I should have had pretty good do it. All right, it's the place to bring new ideas for discussion. Number 4 here, I think, is particularly important. AERS doesn't keep it out just because it's way out. Oddball ideas are welcome. You might leave here. I have them anymore, but nevertheless. And another thing that I'm very proud of as far as AERS is concerned is what we have done with students over the years. I was a student when I first belonged to AERS, and my mentor, the first time I showed up at an AERS event with a necktie, he told me,